Life has a curious way of revealing truth only after silence has entered the room. We spend so much of our existence believing that the loudest voices carry the greatest power, that those who demand attention somehow deserve it, and that love must always fight to survive. But there comes a moment, a quiet, almost invisible moment, when a soul that has given everything simply decides it has nothing left to surrender. No dramatic farewell, no storm of accusations. Just the gentle closing of a door that had remained open far longer than it should have. That is the moment most people misunderstand. They imagine that the one who walks away is defeated. They mistake peace for weakness. They confuse silence with surrender. Yet there is a kind of silence that does not come from fear. It comes from awakening. It comes from the realization that love should never require the abandonment of oneself. An empath knows this journey better than most. They love with extraordinary patience. They search for broken places in others and believe those places can bloom again with enough compassion. They carry burdens that were never theirs, forgive wounds that should never have been inflicted, and continue offering light long after darkness has begun consuming them. They mistake endurance for loyalty because they believe every heart deserves another chance. But every heart also reaches a limit. There comes a day when even the gentlest spirit recognizes that kindness is not meant to be a prison, that forgiveness is not permission for endless harm, that loving another person should never demand the destruction of your own peace. And when that realization finally arrives, something extraordinary happens. The empath does not simply leave a relationship. They leave behind the role that kept another person's illusion alive. What follows is rarely seen by the outside world. People notice the empty chair, the unanswered message, the absence where someone once stood. What they do not see is the invisible earthquake beneath the surface. They do not hear the echo inside the one who believed they would always be able to return, manipulate, persuade, or reclaim what was lost. Because some departures are louder than screams. Some goodbyes continue speaking long after words have disappeared. Today's journey is about that hidden story, the one almost no one talks about. It is about what truly happens when an empath finally chooses themselves. It is about the psychological unraveling that begins when control slips away forever. It is about why freedom becomes the greatest answer to manipulation, and why the person who once seemed powerless often becomes the strongest soul in the room simply by refusing to return. Before this conversation ends, you may discover that the greatest victory is never proving your worth to someone who refused to see it, but remembering that your light was never meant to burn just to keep someone else's darkness alive. The most painful moment for a narcissist is rarely the argument, the confrontation, or even the exposure of their behavior. Those moments, while uncomfortable, still offer an opportunity to regain control. A narcissist often thrives on emotional reactions, whether they come in the form of tears, anger, pleading, or desperate attempts to be understood. Every response reassures them that they still occupy space in another person's mind. But when an empath quietly walks away, something entirely different happens. The source of emotional validation they once relied upon disappears without resistance. There is no battle to win, no conversation to manipulate, and no emotional thread left to pull. The silence itself becomes a mirror, reflecting everything they spent years trying to avoid. An empath usually does not leave impulsively. Their departure is often preceded by countless attempts to repair the relationship. They have listened, forgiven, explained, sacrificed, and hoped that love would eventually soften the other person's heart. They stay through broken promises because they believe people can change. They endure criticism because they choose compassion over judgment. They convince themselves that patience is stronger than resentment. By the time they finally decide to leave, their emotional reserves have already been exhausted. Their silence is not revenge. It is acceptance. It is the quiet understanding that no amount of love can transform someone who refuses to face themselves. For the narcissist, this kind of departure creates a crisis unlike any other. They expected more chances. They expected another apology to be accepted, another cycle to begin, another opportunity to restore the familiar pattern of control. Instead, they encounter something they cannot easily manipulate: emotional absence. The empath no longer argues because there is nothing left to defend. They no longer chase because they no longer seek validation. They no longer explain because they have already accepted what words could never change. This emotional withdrawal removes the very foundation upon which manipulation depends. What makes this especially unsettling is that the narcissist often built much of their identity around the belief that people would never truly leave. They assumed their charm, intimidation, guilt, or promises would eventually pull others back. When an empath breaks that expectation, the illusion of permanent control begins to fracture. Questions emerge that cannot be silenced through distraction alone. Why did they stop caring? Why are they no longer reacting? Why has every familiar tactic suddenly become ineffective? These questions create discomfort because they point toward a reality the narcissist has spent years avoiding. Control has limits. The empath's quiet exit also changes the emotional balance in unexpected ways. Instead of carrying the weight of the relationship, they begin reclaiming their own identity. Their energy returns. Their confidence slowly rebuilds. They discover moments of peace that once seemed impossible. Meanwhile, the narcissist is left confronting the emptiness created by losing someone who consistently provided attention, forgiveness, and emotional investment. The silence becomes impossible to ignore because it carries a message louder than any accusation ever could, revealing that the greatest loss is not the relationship itself, but the disappearance of the control they believed would always remain. A narcissist carefully constructs an identity designed to impress, attract, and dominate the perceptions of others. This identity often appears confident, charismatic, successful, or emotionally invulnerable. Beneath that polished exterior, however, lies a fragile sense of self that depends heavily on constant validation. The image they present is less a reflection of who they truly are, and more a shield protecting them from feelings of inadequacy, shame, and insecurity. An empath, because of their deep capacity for understanding and compassion, often becomes one of the strongest supporters of this carefully maintained illusion. They see potential where others see flaws, offer reassurance during moments of instability, and repeatedly give the narcissist opportunities to recover from hurtful behavior. Without realizing it, the empath becomes a mirror that reflects back the version of themselves the narcissist desperately wants to believe. This reflection is comforting because it allows the narcissist to avoid confronting uncomfortable truths. As long as someone continues believing in them, forgiving them, and remaining emotionally invested, they can maintain the illusion that their behavior has no lasting consequences. Every act of patience from the empath strengthens the belief that they are still admired, still desired, and still in control. Instead of looking inward, they rely on another person's loyalty to preserve a carefully crafted identity that exists only through external confirmation. When the empath finally walks away, that reflection disappears. Suddenly, the image the narcissist relied upon begins to crack. There is no familiar voice reminding them of their worth despite their actions. There is no one absorbing the emotional chaos or explaining away destructive patterns. The departure forces an uncomfortable reality into view. The admiration they once expected is replaced by silence, and the silence cannot be manipulated into praise. For someone whose identity depends on constant reinforcement, this absence creates profound psychological discomfort. At first, the narcissist may attempt to restore the reflection through familiar methods. They might reach out with charm, promises of change, guilt, or attempts to provoke jealousy. They may seek attention from new people, believing another source of admiration will quickly replace what was lost. While these efforts can provide temporary relief, they rarely resolve the deeper issue. The original mirror is gone, and with it goes the unique validation that came from someone who genuinely believed in them despite repeated disappointments. This loss exposes an emptiness that has often been hidden beneath years of performance. Without the empath's unwavering emotional investment, moments of loneliness become harder to escape. Doubts emerge that cannot easily be silenced. The confidence that once appeared effortless begins to require greater effort to maintain. Every failed attempt to regain control becomes another reminder that the image they depended upon was never entirely real. It existed because someone else continued reflecting it back to them. Meanwhile, the empath begins seeing themselves more clearly. Freed from the constant responsibility of maintaining another person's emotional world, they rediscover their own voice, values, and boundaries. They realize that compassion does not require self-sacrifice, and that love cannot survive where authenticity is absent. As the empath's sense of self grows stronger, the narcissist's carefully constructed mask becomes increasingly difficult to sustain, leaving them face to face with the emptiness they spent so long trying to hide from themselves rather than the reflection they once believed could never fade. One of the greatest misconceptions about narcissistic relationships is the belief that a narcissist can easily replace anyone who leaves. From the outside, it may seem true. They often move on quickly, surround themselves with new people, and appear unaffected by the loss. Social media may show smiling faces, exciting adventures, or a new relationship that seems effortless. To the empath who invested deeply in the relationship, this can feel like proof that they never mattered. But Appearances rarely reveal the emotional reality beneath the surface. What looks like an easy replacement is often an urgent attempt to escape the discomfort created by losing someone who provided consistent emotional validation. A narcissist does not usually seek people because they value genuine intimacy. Instead, they seek what those people can provide. Admiration, attention, praise, forgiveness, and emotional energy become sources of reassurance that temporarily quiet inner insecurity. Every new relationship begins with excitement because it offers fresh opportunities for validation. The other person has not yet recognized the patterns of manipulation, blame, or emotional inconsistency. Everything feels possible, and the narcissist enjoys the admiration that naturally accompanies first impressions. An empath, however, offers something different from casual admiration. Their loyalty is remarkably resilient. They remain present during difficult moments, search for understanding instead of judgment, and often continue loving even after experiencing repeated disappointment. This level of emotional investment creates a powerful source of validation for the narcissist. Knowing someone continues to believe in them despite their behavior becomes deeply reinforcing. It is not easily duplicated because it is built over time through patience, sacrifice, and unwavering hope. When that empath finally walks away, the narcissist may immediately seek another person to fill the empty space. They may convince themselves that anyone can serve the same purpose. Yet every new connection lacks the history that made the previous relationship so valuable. Trust has not been established. Loyalty has not been tested. The emotional devotion that the empath developed through years of giving cannot simply appear overnight. As a result, the narcissist often finds themselves chasing the feeling they once took for granted without fully understanding why it remains out of reach. This can create a cycle of dissatisfaction. New relationships initially provide excitement, but the novelty eventually fades. The same patterns of control, criticism, and emotional manipulation begin to emerge, causing the new person to question the relationship. Once admiration weakens, the narcissist experiences the familiar fear of losing influence. They search again for another source of attention, believing the next relationship will finally provide lasting satisfaction. Instead, they repeat the same cycle because the emptiness they are trying to escape does not come from losing a particular person alone. It comes from never developing a secure sense of self that exists independently of constant external approval. Meanwhile, the empath's absence continues to hold meaning because it represents something that cannot be recreated through appearances or charm alone. Genuine trust, unconditional compassion, and emotional depth cannot be manufactured on demand. They are earned through honesty, mutual respect, and consistent care. The narcissist may accumulate countless new connections, but without authentic change, each relationship becomes another temporary distraction rather than a true replacement. The void remains because what was lost was never simply another person, but the rare presence of someone whose love endured far beyond what should have been expected, leaving behind an absence that no amount of borrowed admiration can permanently erase. Walking away is often misunderstood as an act of giving up, But for an empath, it is one of the greatest expressions of courage. It is not a decision made in anger or out of a desire for revenge. It comes after countless nights of questioning, forgiving, hoping, and trying again. An empath rarely leaves at the first sign of pain. They stay because they believe in healing. They remain because they see the wounded child behind the harmful behavior. They convince themselves that love, patience, and understanding can transform even the most difficult relationship. Yet there comes a point when they recognize that compassion loses its purpose if it continually demands the sacrifice of their own well-being. In that moment, letting go becomes less about abandoning another person and more about finally choosing themselves. This choice is not easy because empaths often carry a deep sense of responsibility for the emotions of others. They have spent so much time easing someone else's pain that they forget how to care for their own. They apologize for problems they did not create, accept blame to avoid conflict, and silence their own needs in the hope of preserving peace. Over time, this pattern slowly erodes their confidence. They begin questioning their instincts, doubting their worth, and believing they must work harder to earn the love they freely give away. The relationship becomes an endless cycle of proving, fixing, and waiting for change that never fully arrives. The moment they step away, something subtle but powerful begins to happen. At first, there is grief. They mourn not only the relationship, but also the future they imagined. They miss the person they hoped their partner could become, rather than the reality they experienced. There may be loneliness, guilt, and uncertainty. These feelings are natural because healing is rarely immediate. However, beneath that pain lies something that has been buried for a long time: freedom. Without constant criticism, manipulation, or emotional unpredictability, the nervous system slowly begins to relax. The mind grows quieter. The heart no longer lives in a state of constant anticipation, wondering what conflict might come next. As the days pass, the empath starts reconnecting with parts of themselves that had almost disappeared. They remember hobbies they abandoned, friendships they neglected, dreams they postponed, and values they compromised. They begin making decisions without fear of someone else's reaction. They rediscover laughter that feels genuine rather than forced. They learn that peace is not something another person grants them, but something they protect through healthy boundaries. Each small step towards self-respect strengthens the foundation of a life built on authenticity instead of approval. Perhaps the greatest transformation is the realization that love does not require endless suffering. An empath begins to understand that kindness should never come at the cost of dignity, and that forgiveness does not obligate continued access to their life. They recognize that walking away was never a sign of weakness, but evidence of profound inner strength. It takes remarkable courage to release what once defined you, especially when your heart still wishes things had been different. By choosing distance over dysfunction, the empath creates space for healing, self-discovery, and relationships rooted in mutual respect, proving that the deepest act of love is sometimes the quiet decision to stop abandoning yourself for someone who never truly valued the gift of your presence. There is a profound difference between physically leaving someone and becoming emotionally unreachable. Many people can create distance for a time, yet remain deeply connected through unanswered questions, lingering hope, or the desire to be understood. A narcissist often depends on these invisible emotional ties. Even after a relationship ends, they may attempt to regain influence through unexpected messages, apologies, promises, criticism, or carefully timed displays of affection. Their goal is not always reconciliation, but the reassurance that they still have access to the other person's emotions. As long as the empath continues reacting with anger, sadness, guilt, or longing, a connection remains. True freedom begins only when that emotional doorway quietly closes. For an empath, reaching this place is rarely immediate. They naturally search for meaning, replay conversations, and wonder whether they could have done more. Their compassionate nature makes it difficult to accept that some people are unwilling to change. They may hope that enough time, honesty, or patience will eventually lead to understanding. This hope keeps them emotionally available, even from a distance. Although they are no longer physically present, part of their heart continues waiting for an apology, an explanation, or the version of the relationship they always believed was possible. Healing gradually transforms that hope into clarity. Instead of asking why someone failed to love them correctly, the empath begins asking why they accepted treatment that diminished their own spirit. This shift is powerful because it redirects attention away from changing another person and toward understanding themselves. They stop measuring their worth through someone else's approval. They begin trusting their instincts again, recognizing patterns they once ignored, and accepting that healthy love never requires constant self-sacrifice. Every step towards self-awareness weakens the emotional grip manipulation once held over them. As this transformation continues, the narcissist often notices an unfamiliar silence. The usual methods of provoking a response become ineffective. Messages go unanswered or receive calm, emotionless replies. Attempts to create jealousy no longer succeed. Guilt loses its influence because the empath no longer believes they are responsible for another person's choices. This emotional independence is deeply unsettling for someone who has relied on control. The absence of reaction leaves them without the reassurance they once expected, forcing them to confront a situation they cannot easily manipulate. Becoming emotionally unreachable does not mean becoming cold or incapable of love. It means developing the wisdom to protect that love with healthy boundaries. The empath still possesses compassion, generosity, and understanding, but these qualities are no longer offered without discernment. They learn that kindness is strongest when paired with self-respect. They recognize that forgiveness can exist without reconciliation, and that wishing someone well does not require inviting them back into a harmful pattern. Their heart remains open, but it is no longer unguarded. This new way of living changes every future relationship. Instead of seeking validation, the empath seeks mutual respect. Instead of fearing loneliness, they value inner peace. Instead of chasing people who repeatedly drain their spirit, they invest in connections that nourish growth, honesty, and trust. Their silence is no longer filled with longing, but with confidence. It carries the quiet certainty that their value was never determined by another person's inability to appreciate it, and that the greatest form of freedom is becoming so deeply rooted in your own worth that no attempt to manipulate, diminish, or reclaim you can ever disturb the peace you have finally chosen to protect.